Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of August 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by David Scott. And of course, David reporting from north of the border with northern exposure. Well, the scene behind us is a bit that way, isn't it, Mike?
Well, it is, yes. Let's get straight on to it. Here's Boris yesterday. I'm not going to inflict his voice on anybody, but he was, well, I suppose, reiterating or regurgitating the same old stuff on his Twitter feed yesterday with this delightful video. And of course, he's campaigning. He's campaigning for something, although he's not admitting that he's campaigning for something, but he's talking about the NHS and the usual stuff. But in the meantime, Boris and whatever Boris is doing is generating more and more angst and hysteria. Is that the right word? Certainly people starting to get a bit worried about what the next steps might be. If you remember back in April, John Major was coming out talking about one way is a general election that produces a clear majority. The other is to have some sort of unity or national government. And suddenly governments of national unity are back in the press again. Nicky Morgan even was saying something about this at the time. It may well be that you end up with a cross-party approach to finding a majority in the House of Commons. So the House of Commons very concerned that there's going to be a no-deal Brexit. This continues, and certainly when they come back after the summer break, I don't think anything much is going to change. Now, in the meantime, this article was posted on the Times, how the Commons could thwart Boris Johnson's no-deal Brexit, and it was saying that in 2017 MPs gave a third reading to the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Act by 494 votes to 122, a majority of 382. This year, they 3 times rejected the withdrawal agreement, and so it goes on, and talking about what could possibly be done about all this. David, if we just come back to the Government of National Unity situation, do you really think this is a prospect?
Well, it's very awkward. There's a lot of people who would seem to want it to happen. There's been an enormous amount of chit-chat about this on LBC and on Radio 4 and all the political talking heads.
Well, absolutely, because here's the Week, the New Statesman, even Guido Fawkes, they're all talking about this. Guido Fawkes giving a list of the potential leaders of a national unity government. The Telegraph, David, they are electing Kenneth Clarke.
Yes, and I picked this up first in LBC. There was a long piece and someone phoned in, a Labour supporter, saying, Ken Clarke's the man to lead a national unity government. I thought, well, that's interesting. I bet that's doing the rounds, and sure enough, there it was in the Telegraph. So and the argument goes that elder statesmen, well respected, we'll come to that in a minute, and not going to stand again, and and long-time opponent of leaving the EU. So this is the case for Ken Clarke. So there's a lot of speculation about who the next Prime Minister would be. And this is all on the assumption that the Boris Johnson government loses a vote of no confidence and that there's some alternative within the existing House of Commons which could assemble this sort of government. There seems to be an awful lot of barriers to this. But, I just wonder if it might just happen. We might wake up one day and find we have an entirely new government, and that entirely new government is going to give away our sovereignty to the EU, or rather keep our sovereignty in the hands of the EU.
Well, we'll come on to the situation with a no confidence vote in a second, but you made the point that Ken Clarke, of course, being presented as a man with a great reputation.
Yes, and I wonder what certain people well known to us, like Ben Fellows, might say about this, because here's Ben Fellows celebrating after being found not to have made a false claim when he said that Ken Clarke groped him. That was very big in the press when everyone thought Ben Fellows was going to be convicted. But the announcement that he was acquitted, and isn't jury trial a wonderful thing, was quite quietly handled in the press. It was a agency reporter, for example, in the Telegraph, not any one of their staff, who actually handled the matter there. And of course, you wonder in these circumstances what Melanie Shaw would think, sitting in Rampton, essentially for having reported child abuse in the Nottinghamshire care system, to see a man like Ken Clarke running the country. It would be a strange moment for her, I am sure.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating though, David, that Ben Fellows was found not guilty of making a false claim against Ken Clarke? So surely that means that the claim he made must stand at law. Maybe I'm in error here.
Well, I mean, it certainly means the substance to it. It means there's no evidence that he invented or fabricated the matter. So yes, and all of this seems to have been completely forgotten, because we're having pieces in the Telegraph lauding Ken Clarke as a potential leader of the country in these difficult times, etc., etc. And this is just gone. This is down the memory hole, it would seem.
But in the meantime, there's been a bit of furore in Scotland because John McDonnell was up there. Was he taking part in some interview on the Edinburgh Fringe? Is that what he was up to?
Yes, and he's made several comments. He made an initial comment down in England, and he kind of doubled down on it when he came up to Scotland. And the comment is essentially the SNP can have their referendum, another referendum in the same generation referendum, that one. And this seems to be an overture to Nicola Sturgeon and the troops to reach some sort of anti-Brexit far-left alliance. Now, this has completely cut the legs from the Scottish Labour Party, who have more than enough problems without this sort of intervention from the South. This has cut the legs from the Scottish Labour Party, who have been opposing a second independence referendum and opposing breaking up the UK consistently as part of their kind of core offering to the public. And here the Shadow Chancellor comes up and completely undermines that. So it's not good. I mean, I've seen some die-hard Scottish Labour people on Twitter essentially say that this leaves them with nowhere to go. It's extremely damaging for Scottish Labour, but of course, people like McDonnell don't care. And he has the same basic view as the Nicola Sturgeon wing of the SNP, which is a hatred for Britain and for everything that it stands for. And he'd be quite happy to see it broken up and made into several vassal states of the EU. This would suit him, and it would suit Nicola Sturgeon. It would suit many people who don't like this country, but the people who love this country would not be pleased.
So what has Ian Blackford been up to then?
I know, this is interesting. This, I think, is a bit of honesty. And we don't get much of that from dear Ian, so it's just marking the moment. So this is a tweet. And he put out, "Together we can build a better society in Scotland. We can escape a Brexit-obsessed UK government." I would point out here that the most constitutionally obsessed part of the UK is the SNP, but we'll skirt over that. A Brexit-obsessed UK government, and we can forge our own way in the world as an inclusive EU nation. A what? An EU nation. So he's admitting that there's no independence in offer here. We'll be part of the EU. That putting that before the word nation means a nation owned by the EU.
Can I just ask, how do you forge your own way as an inclusive EU nation? Because that isn't possible.
Well, yeah, exactly so. I mean, this is the problem with the SNP. Independence within the EU policy doesn't make any sense. None of it's possible. And he continues on. It gets a little creepy towards the end, but we must work for it. We must convince the undecideds, apostrophe S, and befriend the unconvinced. So if you see a Scottish nationalist trying to befriend you, he's probably looking for your vote. It's not genuine. And that's a little, there's a lot of cult comments made about the SNP in Scotland, and that's why.
Okay, well, let's get back to the issue of a potential of a no confidence vote in Westminster then. The Times here, Boris Johnson to defy any vote of no confidence. And this article really suggesting that, of course, he doesn't, if there's a vote of no confidence, he can just ignore it. So it says Boris Johnson would refuse to resign even after losing a confidence vote, so he could have through a no-deal Brexit on October 31st, under plans being considered by Downing Street, and so it goes on. Now, this article produced a response from Malcolm Rifkind. So here he is, and this is what he had to say. So this went in as a letter to the Times. He said, "Sir, it is a convention and not part of any act that the government has to resign if defeated in a confidence vote, and that a general election is the ultimate way in which a constitutional crisis can be resolved. It is also the case that the Supreme Court cannot enforce respect for conventions that are not incorporated in an Act of Parliament." He goes on to say, "It is, however, also only a convention, not a law, that the Queen can act only on the advice of her ministers. It is only a convention that the Queen cannot dismiss her Prime Minister even if he is flouting the Constitution. If the Prime Minister refused to respect the normal consequence of losing a confidence vote, and if he sought to prevent both Parliament and the electorate having a final say on no deal, he would create the gravest constitutional crisis since the actions of Charles I that led to the Civil War." And he finishes off by saying, "I have great confidence that the Prime Minister will ignore the advice of Dominic Cummings. King Charles lost his head by flouting the Constitution. Mr. Johnson will wish to keep his, while some around him are clearly losing theirs." So, David, I don't know what you think about that position from Malcolm Rifkind. There's a number of points we might consider there. The first one of them being the fact that he claims that the Supreme Court can have no power to enforce a convention. But is Boris Johnson, do you think, at risk of losing his head here?
That was a very interesting piece. I mean, the first part of it was factual and useful. Then he raises the spectre of civil war. Now, that would be alarmist. I mean, there's no sign of anything like that. We're a million miles from anything like that. And yet, here you have a former Minister of the Crown raising the prospect. That's very strange. Then the bit about Boris losing his head, and it's not entirely clear if that's a metaphor or a threat. And also the suggestion that the monarchy will be used to resolve this if necessary. We even saw this in The Guardian this week. The Guardian was saying, well, with all this Boris and Brexit and things, our saviour will be the monarchy. The Guardian said that. And they're essentially saying that the next generation of the monarchy are going to be, very socially justice aware and woke, and will be resisting the forces of Brexit. Now, I think that's bizarre. But you're seeing people now circling around the monarchy looking to see who gets to play that particular counter on the board.
Yes. I think I'd just add to this, isn't it remarkable that we see John Major suddenly dragged back into the picture, and also Rifkin. Let's not forget that the end of his career was he had to step down from the Intelligence and Defence Committee because he'd been filmed, I think it was, setting up some interesting little deal with what he thought was a Chinese company. So duplicitous as a minimum, and yet we're supposedly to take his counsel. Has he got another duplicitous purpose in talking about civil war in this country? I wonder.
No thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is... I was very glad we were covering this area today, because the overall view is there seems to be many, many conspiracies afoot. There are many plots. I wonder when we come back on in 2 weeks' time, what sort of country we'll be in. It might change extremely rapidly.
That's, I think, absolutely correct. Now, let's have a look at today's fake news, and it comes from the Financial Times. Russians feel the pain of Vladimir Putin's regime. Well, what are they saying? As pro-democracy protests hit central Moscow this summer, but the continued defiance from tens of thousands who have taken to the streets this summer has underlined the depth of the disaffection at a 20-year-long regime that has failed to deliver economic growth or rising living standards for much of the past 5 years. No mention of sanctions here, David. We don't need to talk about that. This is all Putin's fault that the Russian economy is struggling at the moment. The latest protests were called after opposition activists were banned from competing in Moscow council elections in September. No mention of any external meddling in Russia's affairs. Actually, there was some mention. We'll come on to that in a second. They say the GDP per capita lags behind other former Soviet states. Again, that statement made without any qualification about sanctions. This was the little graph that they put out to show Putin's popularity, his approval ratings. And they're trying to say that this graph shows that Putin is deeply unpopular in Russia. And as you can see, the top line there is red. And that is his approval rating. Those are the percentage of people that approve of him. And the bottom blue line there is the people that disapprove of him. And as we can see, really, if you take an average there over the last 20 years, it's pretty flat, David. And apart from anything else, it's even at the levels that they say are collapsing, even though it's an upward trend once again. It's still, what's that, around 68%. If we can
approve of him.
Approve of him, yes. So let's have a look at the UK situation, where we have 31% approving of Boris, 19% approving of Jeremy Corbyn, 28% approving of Jo Swinson, 32% approving of Nigel Farage. This is the latest figures from Ipsos Mori, from their latest poll. I become lost for words increasingly about how the mainstream media can publish this type of thing and make the statements that they make with such brazen brass neckness and expect to get away with it.
It's remarkable, right? 68% on a bad day. And there is not a single leader in the Western world who wouldn't kill for a 68% approval record. Most of them, literally.
Yeah.
68% to 85%, right, and consistent over 20 years. Now, the actual correct summary of that is Putin shows a remarkable degree of support over a remarkable time span with the Russian people. That's true.
And I'll just add, some of our viewers picked up on the picture that was used there. The lady had a slight yellow flash on her rucksack, and you're immediately reminded that actually this sort of police brutality was Macron style. Well, it's still going on in France, but of course the mainstream press don't want to talk about that here, because that's the EU, where we don't worry about approval ratings at all.
No, we don't need to. Okay, let's move on quickly. And just a quick reminder, if you like what we're doing and you'd like to support the UK column, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are options for how you can do that there. And a reminder that this is the last UK column news for 2 weeks. So we will be on holiday for the next 2 weeks. So the next actual news broadcast will be on the 20th, Wednesday, the 20th of August. Now, what's been going on with David Noakes?
Well, it's not good is the answer. So both David, we've got events for both David and Lynn Thayer. Let's have a look at what's been happening. So David appeared in court yesterday. The judge would not permit John Smith to present a common law challenge to the trial proceedings. That was simply a no. Despite the fact that David Noakes had sacked his legal team, that legal team were invited into the court by the judge, and David himself was excluded from speaking. Now, this tactic was used to enormous effect in order to suppress Melanie Shaw, that even though she'd sacked legal teams, they were still appearing in court claiming to represent her, and this theatre was supported by the judge. Here it is being used with David Noakes. David was unaware of the purpose or content of a discussion which took place between the judge, his sacked legal team, and an MHRA legal team. So we've got court hearing. It's effectively a what's the star chamber, because there's just the judge, and there's a team that you've sacked are having a cosy little discussion with the judge and the MHRA legal team, and you're the person accused and you have no idea what they're talking about. Welcome to United Kingdom and Justice 2019. Meanwhile, Lynn Thayer has now been extradited to France via Calais, and she's believed to be en route to a prison in the Paris region, where she's going to be facing ultimately 9 charges, and those charges have simply been transferred from David Noakes. So these were original charges raised against David Noakes, but at a particular point they were simply scooped and moved across and placed on Lynn Thayer. But she can be held in this present prison location for 2 years and 4 months before even coming to trial. And the French judge has already asked that both Lynn and David Noakes should face a sentence of 10 years. So this is the sort of justice we can expect in the EU. Well, perhaps we already knew that, but of course this is the EU justice that has now moved over the channel and is in UK courts. David, this star chamber tactic is so dangerous because the juries are out. We simply have appointed judges, and if you try and find out who appoints them, well, it's the appointments committee. Who appoints the judicial appointments committee? Nobody wants to tell us. So these are star chambers now metering out punishment. There is no justice.
There is no justice. This is absolutely correct. You cannot now go to a British court, be it England or Scotland, and be in a situation where either you are opposing the will of the state or you are opposing the will of actors sufficiently large, powerful and rich to influence the state. In those circumstances, you will lose. There will not be justice. There will simply be the answer that best fits the status quo, which is you lose. There's no protection from the courts for the individual. There's no respect of the common law from the courts. The courts are very much the heart of our nation, and they have fallen.
They've fallen, absolutely. So we just remind viewers of this report. Now, this is on government.uk website, but it's a report on the notorious David Noakes, 10 million Guernsey GC MAF crook imprisoned. This is sort of Sun terminology. It's red top terminology on a government website. This is the bit that caught my eye. GC MAF was advertised as a miracle cure for a range of conditions, including cancer, HIV and autism. There is no scientific basis for any of Noakes' claims about the product, and the court heard Noakes made approximately 10 million from the sale of GC MAF between 2012 and 2015. This disgraceful report is here as the result of MHRA. And we say we think people should be challenging MHRA over their flawed claims about GC MAF, because to say there's no evidence is clearly untrue. They are not looking at the evidence, and it would appear that they're deliberately doing that. So that is one route that people might like to go if they really want to start to make some impact. And the other one is we need to get hold of the press. There's some disgraceful reporting going on. So this is Eleanor Haywood from the Daily Mail. She was crowing on her Twitter page about this headline on the Daily Mail: New Dawn in Cancer War, UK Drugs Revolution, the best chance yet to beat the disease. What that really is another license to print money for big pharmaceuticals, as long as they can suppress factual information about other proper ways of dealing with cancer. And then, of course, this lady produced this disgraceful headline a couple of days ago: dementia is now the cause of 1 in 8 deaths. I did call her to point out that actually dementia is not a terminal illness, and I got a very waffly reply. I asked her if she'd seen any of the evidence as to what was really happening with dementia patients, that they were being starved and dehydrated in order to hasten their demise. She said she wasn't worried about any of that because she hadn't seen any of that evidence. But I'll just end here with a positive note with Lynn Thyers. A lady called Susan sent me this email saying that she'd already contacted a church in Boulogne in France where she's asked the pastor if he can get in to visit Lynn, and she sent blessings to everybody who has been able to do something or could do something. So we were delighted to see that people are already reacting in France, and I hope that will grow. And then we are going to put up an advert here for the GC-MAF awareness event, which is at 11 minutes past 11 on the 11th of September outside Parliament. So we do hope that as many people as possible can get there to start asking questions about why GC-MAF is being suppressed. And of course, bear in mind that a recent protest that took place outside Parliament was broken up because clearly too many people were challenging the government. But 11 minutes past 11 on the 11th of September, GC-MAF is the topic in Parliament Square.
Well, there's no government money or research money for GC-MAF officially anyway, but there is plenty for artificial intelligence. 250 million pounds put on the table for NHS artificial intelligence development. So this is a new artificial intelligence lab which will use the power of artificial intelligence to improve the health and lives of patients. The AI lab will bring together the industry's best academics, specialists and technology companies to work on some of the biggest challenges in health and care, including earlier cancer detection, new dementia treatments and more personalised care. AI is already being developed in some hospitals, successfully predicting cancer survival rates and cutting the number of missed appointments. How do you predict cancer survival rates? Does that mean that if the AI says you're not likely to survive, that treatment is withdrawn at that point, or you're put on a pathway?
One would imagine either or both, Mike, judging by what we're seeing in the reports that are coming out of the NHS at the moment. And we make that statement knowing that many NHS staff are working desperately hard within this very toxic NHS management system.
Absolutely. So the AI lab's work could include apparently improved cancer screening, use predictive models to better estimate future needs of beds, drugs, devices or surgeries, identify which patients could be more easily treated in the community, reducing the pressure on the NHS, identify patients most at risk of diseases such as heart disease or dementia, build systems to detect detect people at risk of post-operative complications, infections, or requiring follow-up from clinicians, upskill the NHS workforce so they can use AI systems for day-to-day tasks, inspect algorithms already used by the NHS to increase the standards of AI safety, and automate routine admin tasks to free up clinicians so more time can be spent with patients. So I'm already feeling reassured. Here is the delightful Matt Hancock, who is our health secretary, saying we are on the cusp of a huge health tech revolution that could transform patient experience by making the NHS a truly predictive, preventive and personalised health and care service. I'm sure that's inspiring.
Not to me, it isn't, Mike.
No. So who's going to be running this? Well, it's this little organisation, NHSX, driving forward the digital transformation of health and social care. Now, I saved people from Boris Johnson earlier, but I can't avoid giving people a bit of Matt Hancock because, well, just watch this.
I love our NHS and I want it to offer patients and staff the world's best health tech. So that brings me on to the latest addition to the NHS family, NHSX. The X stands for User Experience. And we're setting up NHSX for two reasons. Firstly, because our technology leadership is just too diffuse across the system, and that's got in the way of tech transformation with too many bosses, essentially. So NHSX will bring together our tech leadership into one decision-making point. The other reason is I want to bring the culture, the openness, the productivity, the speed of iteration of the internet to the way we deliver tech in health and care. We don't want to micromanage each interaction between suppliers and NHS customers. That would be unwise and it would be totally impractical. I want NHSX to be the bridge between the worlds of healthcare and technology. I've said I want to make the UK the best place in the world to start and grow a health tech business for suppliers.
So, David, did you find that inspiring?
No, I did not find that inspiring. A few points. Right, predictive models. So this is the same sort of technology that is trying to predict the climate, right? That's going badly on the climate, and it's produced politically led scare stories. And I don't really want politically led scare stories to have more traction within the NHS. I don't think that works out well for the people who actually need help. That last little interview there, he's talking about we must have one decision-making point so that we have the speed of the internet in our decision-making. The internet's a diverse network of people operating and cooperating and competing, and there's no single decision-making point. So he doesn't understand what he's talking about. It's just
jargon.
It's smooth words. And I thought it was very interesting that the NHS is already using algorithms to make decisions, but there seems to be a recognition that those algorithms may be less than safe. So I thought that was quite an interesting revelation.
And the other thing is, David, that this is rushing on towards AI and more techno stuff inside the NHS, whereas the picture coming out of the NHS is that there's an absolute breakdown in human interaction and care and kindness and sympathy and empathy. So the human side is being pushed out the door, and this man is crowing. In fact, if you watch him, I think he's off his head because we're bringing in this AI stuff when some algorithm is going to decide whether we live or die.
Absolutely. Well, I think he is off his head, but let me just introduce you to this gentleman. This is Matthew Gould, and he's the chief executive of NHSX. Now, NHSX is going to cover artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data transformation and policy, data and technology strategy and oversight, digital urgent and emergency care, including NHS 111 online, digital pharmacy, digitizing providers, including global digital exemplars, our most digitally advanced trusts is what they say, elective care, including e-referrals, empowering the person, our citizen-facing digital portfolio, including the NHS app, integrating care locally, local health and care records, primary care digital transformation, including GP systems, data and digital services, social care and technical architecture. So this man is going to drive this forward because, of course, as Matt Hancock was saying there, there are too many leaders, so it's all in his hands. So Matthew Gould, what's his background? Well, he has a degree in philosophy and divinity. Yes, highly technical. Well, after he did his degree in philosophy and divinity, he published an article on termite feeding preferences.
Is that the termites' diet, or is that eating the termites?
Not clear.
No.
He then became a career Foreign Office man, including Assistant Desk Officer, NATO Bosnia, Private Secretary for Foreign Affairs to Tony Blair. He became ambassador to Israel between 2011 and 2015. He was the first Jewish and British ambassador to Israel. And then he subsequently launched the UK-Israel Technologies Hub. And this is all about creating a market in the UK for Israeli tech companies. And so my question, David, is this guy continuing that process? He sees the NHS as the biggest domestic market that's going. And so he would be delighted to see Israeli companies taking advantage of the NHS market. And as chief executive of NHSX, he's probably in a very good position to do that.
That may well be the case. And the idea that you have a market that's funded by coercive taxation is a very dangerous one for us and a very lucrative one for big pharma. And also you have to remember that all of this tech is going to be driven on information. That would be your information and mine. That would be our confidential information. and it's going to have to be shared widely in order for any of this to work. So I wouldn't worry too much about GDPR in this context.
No, but let's move on to another NHS-related story. This is BBC News you've highlighted here. Teenager in care almost starved to death.
Yeah, this is a truly horrendous story from North Lanarkshire in Scotland. Severely brain-damaged teenager who was in local authority care almost starved to death, BBC investigation has found. And this is an excellent report from the BBC. We criticise them a lot, but this is actually very well done. The 18-year-old weighed just over 3.5 stones and was severely dehydrated and had sepsis. His relatives claim they were told the young man, who cannot be named, was unlikely to survive. The council responsible for his care says it utterly rejects any suggestion that he was mistreated. So there's nothing to see here, according to North Lanarkshire Council. So it went to a guardianship case. Now the issue here is the young man's father, who'd cared for him for many years and devoted his life to caring for him, himself became ill, and he was hospitalized for a while. And at this point, the young man was taken into state care and was close to death at the end of that process. So earlier this year, a guardianship case, the sheriff's judgment said the young man had suffered grievously while in the overall care of North Lanarkshire Council's social work department in 2016. The sheriff said he had not been cared for adequately and suffered alarming weight loss before being admitted to hospital. In the opinion of the doctors treating him, he exhibited signs of having been punched and deliberately struck. Despite being aware of these failings, the sheriff appointed the council to be his legal guardian. And he also said the father was no longer a suitable guardian. So you see here, this is the combination of the state and power and the law. If the situation was reversed, if that was a parent who had a son in that condition with signs of being struck and weighing 3.5 stone, the parent would be in jail. But because it was the council, not only is no one responsible, but the council get awarded guardianship. It's absolutely appalling, but it gets worse. The sheriff said he believed the boy's health had improved in the new care home and that his father would not cooperate with social workers and carers, potentially putting his son at risk. So here we see we have a story coming out of the social work department to take on the father and to denigrate the father. In February, the sheriff appointed the council as Malcolm's long-term legal guardians. There's huge powers that come with this, so guardianship is everything when it comes to controlling what happens to this young man. He said the father and son had a close and loving relationship, but since his illness, Dave, this is the name they gave the father, had been aggressive and abusive towards carers and social work staff and was not a suitable guardian. The father denied these allegations. So you have social work staff working for the social work department coming up with a story which the father denies, which the judge believes, and for that reason, the father, despite having a close and loving relationship and being the most important thing in that young man's life, can't any longer be allowed by the state to look after him. And it gets worse. This is a comment from the father. He says, it's very overpowering. He knows what home is. He does feel home. He knows home. I can't cry anymore. I've cried so many times and I felt so weak. He's always been at my side 24 hours a day. I gave my whole life up to my son because he needs it. And I enjoy sharing it with him. And I enjoy sharing every single day. Now, that man is currently unable to see his son at all because he cannot agree terms for access with North Lanarkshire Council Social Work Department. So he went to his MSP. His MSP happens to be one of the finest MSPs we have. Let's see how that went. Alex Neil, MSP Airdrie Shorts, said, the council used their powers in a dictatorial way to stop people like me, that's the MSP, that's your political representative, checking on my constituent And I think that it's totally outrageous and unacceptable. They see it as a power struggle between them and the family. That's not how these things should work. The only thing that should matter in this case are the interests of the young boy. So it's all about power, money, controlling blame, getting out from under clearly a horrendous situation of neglect and abuse. And we're using the court system and the assumed power of social work departments to achieve this end.
Constitutionally, we've made this point many, many times. Constitutionally in this country, individuals have the power to do anything unless it's prohibited by law. But institutions, it's the opposite situation. They have the power to do nothing unless they're given that power through legislation or the law. Increasingly, institutions are taking on the constitutional role of individuals by assuming that they have the power to do anything. And nobody seems to be objecting to this. Alex Neil has clearly objected to it because he's come up against it. But we're seeing this misbehavior by local authorities right across the country, not just in Scotland. And people need to start appreciating what their relationship is to the institutions.
Now, this is one of the downsides, one of the perhaps unforeseen consequences of MAPA, the multi-agency public protection arrangements. Yeah, multi-agency public protection arrangements. So this means that when you're dealing with anything like this, you're facing all of the state arrayed and aligned and coordinated against you. Now, this includes the police. So in practice, what this means is that the police will not investigate. They will not investigate local authorities. They will not investigate criminal wrongdoing in local authorities, and they will not investigate people's children and relatives being taken from them without clear legal authority. We have another case which also involves North Lanarkshire Council that we're looking at with the Fresh Start Foundation, and it's all of the same sort of abuse.
Well, let's follow on from this, and I know from some of our viewers and listeners at the moment that they're finding this subject very difficult to grip. We say we've got to get the truth out about what's really happening and what's being done by the state in UK, because if you don't know what's happening, you can't do anything about it. But follow through on that report from that young man and the terrible abuse that he suffered. Let's remind ourselves of what Alexis J said for the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse.
My name is Alexis J, and I'm the chair of the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, the largest and most ambitious public inquiry ever established in the UK. I'm supported by a panel of 3 experts, and it's our job to investigate where institutions have failed to protect children from sexual abuse and to make useful recommendations to stop such failures happening in the future. By institutions, we mean places like children's homes, hospitals, schools, and so on. We also mean where people in authority, like the police or teachers, have failed to act properly when abuse has been reported to them. The inquiry has statutory powers to compel any institution to provide us with information that we request. A core part of our work is called the Truth Project. It's a chance for victims and survivors of child sexual abuse to privately share their experience with us in a safe, secure, and confidential environment. What victims and survivors tell us will help us understand the scale of institutional failure in relation to child sexual abuse. It will help us understand where institutions went wrong. We will then be able to make useful recommendations to help make sure this doesn't keep happening. This inquiry is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to finally expose and understand how, as a society, we have failed to protect children from sexual abuse. We bear a responsibility to children who have already been failed, to children now and to children in the future, to get this right and make them safer.
Well, Well, there you have it. That lady claiming we're going to be looking at institutions, we're going to be looking at people in authority, we're going to be looking at the police, we're going to be looking at everyone who had a duty to actually look after and protect children. We're going to expose it, we're going to learn the lessons, and we're going to do something about it. All of this obviously completely untrue. Just picked out this one thing. She was talking about provide us with information that we request. Well, of course, that was absolutely right, but they won't be requesting information if it would really expose who has been abusing the children and who's been covering up that abuse. And we're a little bit limited for time, but I can tell our viewers and listeners that the UK column absolutely taking ICSA on and asking them questions they don't want to answer. So one of the questions we put to them last couple of days is, can you explain why the inquiry website did not and still does not inform the public that in carrying out the inquiry terms of reference, point 2, subpara 2 as listed, the inquiry would have the power to discriminate against some child abuse survivors and deny them access to the inquiry to give their evidence. So in blue, the inquiry said that it would consider the experience of survivors of child sexual abuse, providing opportunities for them to bear witness to the inquiry, having regard to the need to provide appropriate support in doing so. But that was untrue because they discriminated against some child abuse survivors they didn't want to hear the evidence for. When we challenged them on this, they didn't want to answer. We then moved on to talk about other things that were clearly untrue. So they said the inquiry is required by, in a statement sent to us, it was that the inquiry is required by its terms of reference to investigate institutional failure to protect children from abuse, not the deaths of children in care. So the inquiry tried to say that in its terms of reference, it was not to investigate deaths of children in care. That was absolutely not true. So we said, well, that appears to be in error. And we've also got here where we said to them, do you have a duty of care to actually investigate the deaths of children? So there was no answer to that as well. And we went on to raise a whole number of other points. What did we get back? We got silence, effectively. So we can now show, without a shadow of a doubt, that ICSA has failed to do its duty under its own terms of reference, and it will not investigate police failures to investigate child abuse, and particularly child deaths. And basically, this is the end of it. I said that my questions above are placed in the context of government guidance and law, that everyone has a duty and part to play in working together in the protection of children. These duties, of course, also apply to the inquiry itself, working as it is to help local authorities rectify considerable failings in child protection. What we're getting at here is the law is still running. Just because the inquiry is running doesn't mean to say they don't have to adhere to the law, which says that everybody has a right to, is required to protect children. Their response to this is, we don't care, go away. This was the actual email that the press team sent back. Thank you for your email. To clarify, the Truth Project is available to all victims and survivors and is separate from our investigation. Well, that's not what it appears to be on the website. It appears to be part of their investigation to get people to come and tell the truth. We have already sent you our response to the issues you raised concerning our Nottinghamshire Council's investigation. So ICSA has declared its hand here. Child abuse witnesses can only testify about their abuse if they are approved by the inquiry. Melanie Shaw, of course, was not approved. And the inquiry is not interested in children who have died in the abusive Notts Care system. So Alexis J, of course, did not say this herself, but her team have said it for her. We're running a child abuse inquiry that rejects child abuse evidence, which does not meet our political agenda. This is quite clear. Melanie Shaw certainly does not meet ICSA's political agenda. And no, we are not interested in children who died in the Nottingham childcare system, which ICSA has now already identified as a disastrous system. David, we're very short of time, but the hypocrisy from this this outrageous attempt at an investigation is just obvious. This is a cover-up in front of our very eyes.
Oh, indeed. So just let me get this right. The Truth Project doesn't deal with the truth. The Truth Project is meant to provide information so that the inquiry can understand the scale of abuse, but it's not part of the inquiry's investigation. I don't understand any of that.
Of course, if you think to yourself, what is the inquiry's job? Is it to establish what the truth is, what the facts are, to get the truth out? Then it doesn't make any sense. But if the job of the inquiry is to whitewash everything to protect the establishment and the political elite, then of course it makes total sense.
Yes, if they're there to defuse a situation that would be terminal for the establishment, then that's how you would organise it.
Yeah. And
it's pressure. It's to relieve pressure.
It's to relieve pressure. Absolutely. We're going to do more on it because it is so outrageous what we can now show. But John Wedger has been tweeting out a little bit about ICSA. This was from earlier on because he's talking about March this year. And of course, what emerged in ICSA was that the Home Office had funded the paedophile information exchange. And the gentleman here, I'm sorry, I don't know who the gentleman in the grey jacket speaking, but he was saying very clearly and repeatedly that the Home Office had funded a pro-paedophile activist group, PI, and that evidence was put forward to ICSA. And John Wedger's point is none of it reached the press. So, David,
the attack on our children has come in part from a spiritual and psychological and political movement in the country that wants to take down the family and it wants to get at the children. But it was funded by the state. It was protected by the state. I seem to remember that PI had their filing cabinet with all the records in a Home Office building. So exactly who authorized this, we're not investigating. Where did this come from? We're not investigating. And the mindset that permits that is still permitting other similar abuses today. It's not stopped. If you start to pick at the LGBT movement, which is hugely state funded, there's elements of that which are enormously harmful, but they're state-funded harm. So we're not allowed to question that just now, and we can have an inquiry in 20 years about the abuse that's been suffered.
David, and I'll just end on the point that we began with Boris Johnson, the man, of course, who said that money spent investigating child abuse was effectively spaffed, ejaculated up the wall. That is the standard of Britain's Prime Minister in 2019. So Boris Johnson clearly doesn't want to hear anything about the abuse of children, is not going to be investigating when people are pointing fingers at senior politicians and members of the establishment. That's the man that has now been put as leader of the country. And what we've just demonstrated in two particularly harrowing sections is what the reality of what these people are capable of. Many people are talking in the chat box at the moment saying, what do we do about this? And I think we've got to say the key thing is that people have got to get out in numbers. They've got to be challenging everybody who is clearly on the wrong side, whether it's Boris Johnson, whether it's local authorities, whether it's the care system. They've got to be pounding on their doors and email inboxes every minute of every day. It's exposure by enough people. And of course, turning up outside Parliament also gives another opportunity. We better end there.
Yes.
Okay, so UK column away for our summer holes. First UK column live will be the 28th of August. We will see you then. Enjoy the summer, if there is any left.
Yes, and
okay.
thanks to David. See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.